through a nightmare, Benjamin is home. My heart goes out to his family, especially his mother, who can hold her son again after months of fear and uncertainty at the hands of ICE. No family should ever have to live through this. I will continue showing up to detention facilities to hold ICE and this administration accountable for the terror that they're forcing families to live through each day. I'm glad that Benjamin is home, and I hope he and his family can begin.
Listen to those words. Listen to them ring through that chamber like a bell tolling for a nation that has lost its moral compass, because Congresswoman Luz Rivas just told us that her heart goes out to Benjamin's family, especially his mother, who can finally hold her son again after months of fear and uncertainty at the hands of ICE. And we need to understand something right now at this very moment that will shake you to your core, because this is not just about one high school senior being ripped from his family while walking his dog in Van Nuys. This is about a systematic apparatus of cruelty that has been engineered to inflict maximum psychological damage on the most vulnerable human beings in our society, and we are watching it unfold in real time, with devastating precision. Benjamin Guerrero Cruz, an 18-year-old kid who should have been preparing for senior prom and college applications and all those beautiful mundane rituals of American adolescence, instead spent 4 months being shuttled between detention facilities like cargo, transferred between detention centers, including the LA Detention Center and the Adelanto Detention Center in San Bernardino County, and even across state lines to Arizona, without his family being notified. And you need to sit with that reality for a moment, because it reveals everything about how this administration views immigrant families as disposable objects to be moved and manipulated and terrorized at will. What you just witnessed is a congresswoman standing on the floor of the House, using language that should make every single person in this country stop and reckon with what we have become as a nation, because she did not mince words. She called it what it is. She talked about the terror that ICE is forcing families to live through each day, and that word terror is not hyperbole. It is not political exaggeration. It is the precise clinical terminology for what happens when a state apparatus deploys its power to create constant fear and uncertainty, and the threat of family annihilation hanging over entire communities. Immigrant families held at a detention facility in Texas describe prolonged stays, despondent children, limited access to potable water, and agents offering money for families to voluntarily leave the country. These are court declarations filed just days ago, painting a portrait of conditions inside the South Texas Family Residential Center in Dilley, where children are languishing with denial of critical medical care, worms and mold in the food that result in children becoming ill, and threats of family separation by officers and staff, according to attorneys who have visited these facilities repeatedly. But here is what is about to explode your understanding of this moment, because Benjamin's case is not an outlier. It is not some unfortunate bureaucratic mishap. It is the blueprint for what ICE is doing systematically across this country right now. Since the start of this year, some 600 immigrant children have been placed in government shelters by ICE, a figure that is already higher than the tally for the previous 4 years combined, and is the highest number since record-keeping began a decade ago, according to ProPublica's investigation that just dropped, and should be making front-page headlines everywhere, but is instead being buried under the noise of our fractured media ecosystem. These are not border separations happening at the moment. Families cross into the United States. These are internal separations happening during traffic stops for cracked windshields and forgotten documents. Family separations happening all across the country after encounters with immigration and customs enforcement with the lawsuit against the zero-tolerance policy, resulting in a 2023 settlement that limits separations at the border, but does not address those that occur inside the country, which means ICE has found a loophole to resurrect Trump's most reviled policy, but with even less visibility and even less accountability. And you need to understand the scale of what is happening right now in December 2025, because there have been at least 20 deaths in ICE custody in 2025, the deadliest year since 2004, as the agency is ramping up hiring and increasing detentions, with former ICE officials warning that increased detention population, decreased oversight, an increase in street and community arrests, and continued difficulty staffing medical teams will result in more deaths. And these deaths are not abstractions. They are human beings with names and families and dreams who died in the custody of the United States government while being detained for the administrative violation of being in the country without proper documentation. As of June 29, 2025, there were 57,861 detainees in ICE facilities compared to 38,265 detainees in June 2024, an increase of 51%, that leaves these facilities nearly 45% above their capacity, which means ICE is operating a detention system that is bursting at the seams, overcrowded, understaffed, deadly, and designed to break people psychologically until they give up their legal claims and accept deportation just to escape the horror of indefinite detention. Now here comes the part that should radicalize every person watching this, because ICE officials blocked Congresswoman Rivas from entering the Adelanto detention center multiple times when she tried to conduct oversight and check on Benjamin's well-being. ICE officials at the Adelanto detention facility broke the law and did not allow Congresswoman Rivas inside to conduct her oversight duties, as mandated by law, which means ICE is now so emboldened that it will openly defy congressional authority and prevent elected representatives from performing their constitutional duty to oversee executive branch agencies. Think about what that means for accountability. Think about what that means for transparency. Think about what that signals about an agency that has become completely unmoored from democratic oversight and is operating as its own authoritarian enclave within the federal government. And this is happening under an administration that campaigned on restoring norms and rebuilding institutions, but has instead allowed ICE to expand its detention apparatus to unprecedented levels. The human cost of this system is almost incomprehensible in its cruelty, because a 26-year-old mother detained at Dili with her 5-year-old daughter reported that her daughter has a completely different attitude now, doesn't want to play with other kids, doesn't want to eat due to her emotions, and has lost weight from not eating because the food is too spicy and heavy for her. Radal Benvat. And this is a 5-year-old child whose personality and appetite and will to engage with the world is being systematically destroyed by the trauma of detention, and we have mountains of research showing that the severity of psychological distress and impairment caused by forced separation persists even following reunification and recovery, most likely will not occur in detention settings, ongoing forced separation from family members, forced return to their country of origin, or re-exposure to pre-migration trauma. According to clinicians who have evaluated separated families, we are creating a generation of traumatized children who will carry these wounds for the rest of their lives, and we are doing it deliberately. We are doing it as a matter of policy. We are doing it because this administration believes that inflicting maximum suffering on migrant families will somehow deter future migration, even though every shred of evidence shows that people fleeing violence and poverty and climate catastrophe will continue to come no matter how brutal we make the journey. And let me tell you what makes this even more devastating, because this is happening not under Trump's first term, when family separation became a global scandal that forced even this cruel government to back down in the face of mass protest. This is happening under a Biden administration that promised to be different, that promised to restore humanity to our immigration system, but instead family detention, which expanded under former President Barack Obama, had been paused under the Biden administration before resuming this year, which means Democrats brought back family detention. Democrats allowed ICE to restart these separations. Democrats expanded the capacity of this carceral system, even as they simultaneously passed legislation claiming to protect immigrant rights. The betrayal runs deep, because progressive voters put Biden in office specifically to end Trump's immigration cruelty, and while the aesthetics changed and the rhetoric softened, the underlying machinery of deportation and detention has actually expanded, with 126 people detained on August 23, 2025, a number that has never reached this level before, even for a single day during the 16-year period covered by the data, according to the Vera Institute's analysis. Here is the bombshell that connects everything we are watching, because current law, rules and regulations do not require ICE to notify family members when a detainee is transferred, with the only instance ICE notifies the family being in the case of death, which means families literally do not know where their loved ones are being held, cannot visit them, cannot get them legal representation, cannot even confirm they are alive unless and until ICE decides to inform them of a death. Let that sink all the way into your consciousness, because that is the defining feature of authoritarian regimes throughout history. The disappeared, the people who vanish into state custody with no notification to families, no accountability, no transparency, just the terrifying void of not knowing. And this is happening in the United States of America, in December 2025. This is happening in the richest country in human history, that constantly lectures the rest of the world about human rights and democracy and the rule of law, while operating a detention system that would make Kafka weep. The mechanics of how ICE is terrorizing families should enrage you to your very core, because Benjamin was transferred from the Adelanto detention center to a detention facility in Arizona, and then, while originally slated to be transferred to Louisiana, was transferred back to Adelanto, with ICE's shuffling of Benjamin over this 48-hour period without notifying his immediate family, Within immigration attorneys believe these detainees are intentionally being transferred to other detention centers across the country to sever vital connections to their legal counsel, family, and friends. This is strategic. This is calculated. This is ICE using the geography of its detention network as a weapon to make it impossible for people to fight their cases, because if you keep moving someone across state lines every few days, they cannot maintain a relationship with an attorney, they cannot gather evidence for their case, they cannot have family visit to provide support, they cannot do anything except exist in a state of constant dislocation and psychological torment. And the data shows ICE conducted 2,022 domestic transfer flights from May through July, representing a 90% increase from the same period last year, which means this is not incidental. This is a massive escalation in the use of transfers as a tool of immigration enforcement designed to grind people down until they abandon their legal rights. Now let me tell you what is happening to children specifically, because this is where the true depravity of this system becomes undeniable. Under Trump, kids' average stay in federal custody is nearly 6 months, up from a month under Biden, with lengthy stays leading some children to lose hope. And these are children who are languishing in shelters operated by private contractors who are making enormous profits off the detention of children, with a Department of Homeland Security spokesperson claiming the agency does not separate families, but instead offers parents the choice to have their children deported with them, or to leave the children in the care of another safe adult, while advocates fear the administration is conducting the new separations for the same reasons as before, to deter new immigrants from coming, and to terrify those who are here into leaving. That framing is Orwellian in its dishonesty, because when you arrest someone and tell them their only options are deportation with their child, to a country they fled because of violence, or leaving their child behind in the U.S. shelter system, that is not a choice, that is coercion. That is state-sponsored family destruction dressed up in the language of voluntary decision-making. The conditions inside these detention facilities are a humanitarian catastrophe that is being actively covered up by ICE and its private prison contractors, because seniors, pregnant women, and minors have been held inside the Atlanta IC field office for days at a time, despite the site having no beds, showers, or holding cells. According to Georgia Representative Nikema Williams, who testified before Congress, and when members of Congress try to investigate, the Department of Homeland Security has not responded to questions and has not even acknowledged requests for visits, which means ICE and DHS are stonewalling congressional oversight across the board, are refusing to provide information, are blocking access to facilities, are operating with complete impunity while inflicting suffering on a mass scale. And the private prison companies that run many of these facilities are raking in billions of dollars while detainees report overcrowding, unsanitary conditions, and issues with food and healthcare access as a byproduct of a rapid scaling up of immigration arrests, with the Trump administration having given ICE about $70 billion to hire more staff, including deportation and detention officers, and increase its detention space this summer, which means Congress is actively funding the expansion of this nightmare. But here is where it gets even more sinister. And this is going to make you understand the full scope of what we are witnessing, because ICE is using tactics including threats of jail sentences for resisting a deportation order or crossing the border illegally, crimes that previously were rarely prosecuted and would lead to separation from children, as well as prolonged detention with no opportunity to seek release and deportation to far-flung third countries, according to 16 immigration attorneys, who collectively have hundreds of clients. And these attorneys report that ICE is essentially blackmailing families by threatening to prosecute parents for failure to comply with deportation orders, which carries up to 10 years in prison unless they agree to immediate deportation and abandon any legal claims they might have. This is coercive plea bargaining applied to immigration enforcement. This is using the threat of family separation and criminal prosecution to force people to give up their asylum claims and other legal protections. And it is working because immigrants told they could face months or years of detention as their case moved through the backlogged immigration courts already agreed to leave the country, including a Guatemalan farm worker who left behind her husband and son in Florida after being picked up in a workplace raid, a Venezuelan landscaper who had been living in Texas, an Ecuadorian construction worker in New York, a Mexican social worker in Alabama, and a Honduran nursing student in North Carolina. Every single one of those people had lives here, had families here, had jobs and communities and futures here, and they are gone now because ICE created conditions so unbearable that deportation seemed preferable to continued detention. And we need to call that what it is, which is state violence, which is the deliberate infliction of suffering to achieve policy goals, which is terrorism in the truest sense of that word, because terrorism is the use of violence and intimidation to achieve political objectives, and that is exactly what ICE is doing to immigrant communities across this country. And the political objectives are clear, because the Trump administration has said it aims to deport 1 million people per year, but is likely to fall short of that goal, given current trends with DHS announcing the Trump administration had deported more than 605,000 people since Trump took office, putting it on pace for fewer than 700,000 deportations by year's end, which means ICE is desperately trying to hit deportation quotas and is using every coercive tactic available to force people to accept removal rather than fight their cases in immigration court. Now listen carefully, because this is where the complicity becomes impossible to ignore, and where every Democrat who claims to care about immigrant rights needs to be held accountable, because while Congresswoman Rivas is out here doing the work, showing up at detention centers, introducing legislation like the Inform Act, which would require that within 24 hours ICE must notify the immediate family member of a detainee if the detainee is transferred to another detention center, provided is that the Biden administration had the power to change these policies through executive action and chose not to, had the power to reduce detention, had the power to end contracts with private prison companies, had the power to restore humanitarian protections, and instead the Biden administration recrafted interior enforcement priorities to target national security and public safety threats, and recent border crossers while using the Department of Homeland Security to expel migrants at the southwest border 2.9 million times, of which more than 2.5 million or 86% occurred under Biden, according to the Migration Policy Institute. The liberal establishment wants you to believe that Republicans are the only problem, that Trump is uniquely cruel, that Democrats would fix immigration if only they had more power, but the evidence demolishes that narrative, because Democrats have had power, and they have used it to expand the deportation machine, to increase detention capacity, to continue partnerships with ICE's private prison profiteers, to maintain and even accelerate the rate of expulsions and deportations, and progressive members of Congress like Pramila Jayapal have introduced the Dignity for Detained Immigrants Act, which would repeal mandatory detention for those captured by ICE, create a presumption of release imposing a higher burden of proof to detain primary caregivers and vulnerable populations, and phase out the use of private detention centers by about 2029, but that bill has over 120 Democratic co-sponsors and zero chance of passing because leadership will not bring it to a vote, because the party is fundamentally committed to maintaining the architecture of immigration enforcement, even as individual members perform the theater of opposition. So when you hear Congresswoman Rivas say no family should ever have to live through this, and that she will continue showing up to detention facilities to hold ICE and this administration accountable for the terror that they're forcing families to live through each day, you need to understand that she is speaking truth to power, but that power includes her own party's leadership, includes a Democratic president who campaigned on ending Trump's immigration cruelty but has instead presided over ICE holding families at 2 detention facilities in Texas, with the Karnes County Residential Center holding 1,187 people on June 10, 2025, and the South Texas Family Residential Center in Dilley holding 575 people, despite having shut down family detention in his first year in office. The betrayal is systematic, it is bipartisan, it is structural, and it reveals how deeply the carceral approach to immigration has been embedded into the fabric of American governance across both parties. And here is what makes this so urgent right now in this moment, because we are watching the normalization of family separation in real time. We are watching ICE test the boundaries of how much cruelty the American public will tolerate before there is mass resistance. We are watching a dress rehearsal for authoritarian governance, where federal agencies openly defy congressional oversight and operate detention systems with no meaningful accountability or transparency. Benjamin is home now. He is reunited with his mother after 4 months of torture, but a recent study from UC Berkeley found that when President Trump began his second term on which means there are tens of thousands of Benjamins right now, tens of thousands of families being ripped apart, tens of thousands of children being traumatized, and the machinery is accelerating, the funding is increasing, the political will to stop it is nowhere to be found. What Congresswoman Rivas is demanding is the bare minimum of human decency. She is asking that families be notified when their loved ones are transferred between detention facilities, that members of Congress be allowed to conduct oversight, that ICE be held accountable for the conditions in detention centers, and the deaths in custody, and the psychological torture of indefinite detention without due process. These are not radical demands. These are basic standards of a functioning democracy that claims to respect human rights, and the fact that ICE is rejecting even these minimal requirements tells you everything you need to know about how far we have descended into barbarism. This is not hyperbole. This is not leftist rhetoric. This is documented reality happening right now in facilities across the country where children are losing weight because they are too sad to eat, where mothers are being separated from infant children they are breastfeeding, where teenagers are watching their friends get deported and losing hope that they will ever see their families again. The historical parallel we need to reckon with is not some distant authoritarian regime. It is our own history of family separation during slavery, during the Indian boarding school era, during the Japanese internment camps, because this is America's original sin reasserting itself in new forms, the dehumanization of people deemed other, the willingness to inflict unlimited suffering on those without political power, the construction of vast carceral systems to contain and control populations that the state has decided do not deserve full humanity or full legal protection. And just as those historical atrocities were justified through the language of law and order, and national security, and administrative necessity, ICE is using the same rhetorical frameworks today, claiming that family separation is not really separation because parents have a choice, claiming that detention is necessary for public safety, even though the vast majority of detainees have no criminal history, claiming that conditions are adequate even as children report being denied medical care and eating food contaminated with mold and worms. The resistance to this system has to be total, has to be sustained, has to move beyond symbolic gestures and viral videos and congressional floor speeches into actual material opposition that makes it impossible for ICE to continue operating this way. That means cities refusing to cooperate with ICE. That means communities organizing to prevent arrests and deportations. That means lawyers flooding immigration courts with legal challenges. That means activists disrupting the operations of private prison companies. That means mass protests demanding the abolition of ICE and the complete restructuring of how we approach immigration in this country. And it means holding Democrats accountable for their complicity. It means primarying every member of Congress who votes to fund ICE expansion. It means making immigration detention a litmus test issue the way that other social justice issues have become litmus tests, because we cannot keep electing people who talk about human rights while voting to expand the very systems that are destroying immigrant families. Congresswoman Rivas is showing us what actual resistance looks like. She is risking her political capital by calling out ICE directly, by using words like terror and abduction, by physically showing up at detention centers and demanding entry even when ICE illegally blocks her. This is the kind of courage we need from every elected official who claims progressive values. This is the kind of moral clarity that refuses to paper over atrocities with euphemistic language about border security and operational challenges. Benjamin is home, but the nightmare continues for hundreds of thousands of people trapped in ICE custody right now, and it will continue until we build a mass movement powerful enough to dismantle the entire apparatus of immigration detention and deportation, to create a system based on human dignity rather than punishment and cruelty, to finally reckon with America's long history of using family separation as a tool of social control and white supremacy. The time for polite reform proposals is over. The time for working within the system that created this horror is over. The time for trusting that Democrats will eventually do the right thing is over. What we need now is abolition. What we need now is resistance. What we need now is solidarity with every family being terrorized by ICE. And what we need most of all is the courage to look at what our government is doing in our name and say with absolute moral certainty that this will not stand, that we will not allow it to continue, that we will fight until every detention center is closed and every family is reunited and immigration is treated as the human right that it is rather than the crime that our carceral state has made it.